Hello, and thank you for joining us again for another episode of Hometown Hauntings. I am your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by Megan in San Diego. Megan, welcome to the podcast. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to be part of our guide team out there?
I actually got into the guide team because I was scrolling through Indeed trying to find, a part-time job to help out with the bills and stuff. And I came across this ad for Ghost City Tours. And I was like, hey, this is either a really cool, interesting opportunity or this is a total scam. I'm going to test it out.
One of both.
Exactly. And I got messaged the same day to go ahead and do an interview. And the next day I got called and they asked me 3 questions and that was it. It was, what is your experience in acting? What is your experience in running tours? And do you have any experience with ghosts? And I was like, oh my God, this is like ideal for me. And the way they described the job was I get to talk to a lot of people. I get to dress up in costume and wear whatever I want as long as it's, appropriate for kids, because there are kids on one of the tours, and basically talk about history and ghosts and stuff. And I was like, I'm doing this. This sounds amazing. I've been interested in the occult and ghosts and all of that since I was a little kid. I grew up watching, Taps and Ghost Hunters and stuff like that. So being able to get this opportunity to talk about ghosts and get paid for it
Yeah.
and wear a costume and not look like a crazy person for walking down the street in a crazy costume. I jumped on that. That sounded like the perfect job opportunity for me.
Yeah, you sound like a dream hire. Like, I'll hire you again. You mentioned that you were into this kind of stuff as a kid. Were you like a Wednesday Addams, or did you kind of hide it, or how did you?
I was that kid that would walk around with a book under my arm 24/7. I wasn't necessarily a Wednesday Addams, but I didn't really hide my interest in these kinds of things. I was just like, oh, this is cool. I'm gonna read up on it.
Yeah. What is the craziest story you have from going on tour? We all know that there's crazy guests, there's crazy things that happen. What is your craziest story from tour?
Every once in a while, weird things happen when you're at some of these haunted buildings. It's to be expected. The Ghosts of San Diego tour, which is the child-friendly tour that I run, it's set in Old Town San Diego, and it's got the Whaley House on it, which is listed on government websites as the most haunted house in America.
Mm-hmm.
Government websites.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They just admitted aliens are a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Government websites for years have said that this is the most haunted house. Anytime we're standing in front of that building, I get a cold chill down my spine, or I'll be talking about the ghosts and it'll just all of a sudden, it'll be a cold night. It'll just all of a sudden start getting really hot and I'll start sweating, wiping sweat off my forehead, and people will start asking me, are you okay? People are always starting to get dizzy right there. They'll see a cat when there's not a cat around. All sorts of little things that compound to this place is definitely haunted. When I was going through training at this location, I was told there's a portal on the property,
Okay.
and that if you linger too long, if you spend too much time there, or if you die while on the property, you're going to come back as a ghost on that property. And I was warned that if I start to die, to crawl across the street as fast as possible, because something about crossing the street keeps the ghosts from attaching to you and keeping you permanently.
Saying that out loud probably makes it sound like even more of a crazy thing. That it's like,
Yeah.
oh, if you're dying, just go across the street and you'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly. It sounds insane, but you know what? I totally believe it, because every time I'm there, I get this feeling of I am not alone. And I can be surrounded by a group of people and it's not that kind of feeling. It's, yeah, I'm surrounded by people, but this feeling is there's something standing behind me, watching me and being like, hey, I either don't want you here or keep talking about me.
Right.
Just keep talking.
Yeah.
It's a crazy experience.
Have you ever had anything follow you home at night where you feel like there's something on you or with you?
I've had a couple of instances with weird things like that. I was driving home one day and the vents, all the vents on my car with the AC blowing, slammed shut at the same time.
Oh.
Yeah, all of them at the same time. And then I was in the bathroom at home and I had a plant fly off. There I go, knocking my glasses off. I had a plant fly off my bathroom windowsill because I've got little succulents up there,
Mhm.
and I just had one of them fly off across the room. And that and stuff like that never happened before I started running tours.
That's weird.
Yeah,
That that is weird.
yeah.
Makes you wonder what you bring home.
Yes. I mean, we don't know for sure what's real and what's not, but just for safety's sake, considering that happens, I've started doing this little routine of I'm happy to talk to you ghosts while I'm out here running the job, but none of you are welcome to come home with me.
Mhm.
Just setting that boundary, because everything that they say in taps and other mediums and stuff like that is, if you set that boundary of it can't follow you, it's
Mhm.
not going to happen.
Yeah. Were living in a house in college and it always felt creepy. And I never knew if my roommates were there or not. It's kind of like it was a 2-story duplex. But I remember every time I got home, I would say, I'm home. And like just to announce myself. And then every time I left, I would say, I'm leaving. And then I realized I would do it and I would hear like everyone was gone for the weekend. I just kind of do it to myself as a joke, or maybe I was a little crazy. And I would hear like footsteps somewhere. And this house was probably built in the 30s, so it was old for sure, and probably lots of stories, and had a weird attic and creepy basement and all of that. And it was always like, I'm home, and then it would be silent, and then I'd leave, and I'm like, I'm leaving, and there would be like the creaky floor, the door open,
Hmm.
like, I'm going.
No, I get it. I'm a firm believer that anything that's been around for a really long time is going to attach energy based off of the memories that are made inside the house or
Mhm,
building, whether it's good or bad.
mhm,
So something really happy happens there, it's going to leave a mark,
mhm.
and I fully believe that whatever was there was going, oh, I acknowledge you're heading out.
Right. I remember when we were house hunting, it was the same thing where you would go see a house and the realtor would be like, oh, so this family's divorcing. You'd be like, oh, okay, like our win. And you would walk in there and you're like, there's something that happened here. Like there's really bad juju in here. Like
Yeah.
I don't like the way the house feels. There was one house that was beautiful, but it always felt off kilter. And I was like, I don't know
Hmm.
what's going on in here, but I don't want to, I'm not interested. Like you feel the energy of just probably bad things.
Yeah, exactly. You can tell when something bad has happened. I run both tours with Ghost City, Ghost of San Diego and the Specters and Sinners.
Mhm,
Specters and Sinners is our adult tour. We talk about sex, drugs, alcohol, brothels, all of that. There is one spot on our tour. It's the very last spot on that tour that we stand next to a stairwell where homeless were murdered.
mhm.
And we talk about all of the murderers and serial killers that lived in the San Diego area, including the homeless killer who killed people in that exact spot. And you stand there and you can feel that darkness
Ah,
just radiating off the stairwell.
yeah, yeah. It almost feels like a cartoon, like a Scooby-Doo, when they show like the fog moving over.
Yes, yes, exactly. It's exactly like that.
There's some truth to all of that in, Scooby-Doo, where you feel that like just covering over you. And then it's like as it comes over your body, you turn into this weird, I don't even know what it'd be like post-mortem character. They were onto something. Which is your favorite? Do you like the family friendly, the Ghost of San Diego, or do you like the adults only?
There are a lot more interesting stories, in my opinion, on the Ghost of San Diego tour.
Like me too.
However, it is really fun to talk about the specters and sinners
Mhm.
because you get to talk about some of the things that are considered taboo and make jokes about it and have people go, "Oh, that's interesting." We talk about literally everything from how San Diego was born to how it became what it is now on that tour. Whereas the Old Town tour, we talk just about Old Town.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit of a toss up. If you're looking for the ghost stories, go for Ghosts of San Diego. If you're looking for histories and serial killers and a couple of people who committed suicide who linger, go for the Specters and Sinners.
Most guides prefer the adults only. So that's interesting. That I think they don't feel restrained by the language, like having to watch their language or some of their stories or their jokes. But purely on content, that's a more interesting take on it, that the stories are better with the all ages tour.
Yeah. Well, part of it's because we get to talk about the Whaley House and that I can spend an hour just talking about the Whaley House because of all of the different things that happen there. So to go on that tour and only be able to take 10 minutes to talk about it, you have to condense a lot of information. And it's like, oh my God, but it's just so intriguing being able to talk about these people.
Are you originally from San Diego or did you move from somewhere?
So I'm from Riverside, California area, and I moved to San Diego about 4 years ago.
Okay. Okay. What is your favorite story do you get to tell it, or what's your favorite wish you could tell kind of story on tour?
My favorite story on the tour is actually from Ghost of San Diego and not the Whaley House. It's the Sherman-Gilbert House, which was a home that was built by a man named Mr. Sherman, who was a boom developer in the San Diego area. He was the cousin of General William Tecumseh Sherman from the Civil War,
Yeah.
which is pretty cool. He passed away inside the house, and it was bought by the Gilbert family. Gertrude and Bess were the two daughters, and the ghost story is about an experience that a woman had who cleaned the house and stole from Bess and ended up dead after the effect.
Oh, that's a consequence.
Consequence. It's just really interesting because the main haunting in that building is music floating through the halls.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah,
That's weird. I had that yesterday. I was listening to a podcast. No music in the podcast. There was music playing through my AirPods.
that's crazy.
I kept checking like all of the little speakers around me to make sure nothing else was playing, and it was just through my headphones, my AirPods. There's music playing. Weird. I paused it. I was like, something else is playing. Put it back on. There's just some little ambiance playing in the background. I'm like, okay, we're gonna keep going.
Either the person recording it was haunted, or your earbuds are haunted.
I'm gonna go with the second. And maybe use has the excuse to get a new pair. If you could travel to anywhere in the US or the world to a haunted spot, where would you want to go?
Oh, that is a very hard question. So I got actually two of those off my bucket list,
Okay.
three of those off my bucket list in the last year. For Halloween, not last year, but the year before, I went to Salem,
Mhm.
Massachusetts
Mhm.
on Halloween,
Mhm.
which was a absolutely incredible experience. And on the same trip, we went to the Eastern State Penitentiary.
Okay. Yep.
And then on Friday, as in this last Friday, I was
Mhm.
just in Tombstone, and I got to take the Ghost City Tours Tombstone tour,
Fun.
which was pretty cool as well. So haunted locations that I absolutely love. I guess if I could choose anywhere in the world from here that I
Mhm.
haven't experienced yet, I would probably want to see the Tower of London.
That'd be a good one. Any time of year that you like to go there?
Any time of year is fine. I really don't care if I'm there in the middle of snow. Great. What I My mom, when she was in high school, went with her theater class
Mhm.
to England, and she got pictures of ghosts in the Tower of London. And she got home, and mysteriously, out of her carry-on, which she had with her the entire time, all the pictures were missing. That's not weird at all. So I want to go there for myself and see what I can find.
I was just reading, I think it was something in maybe the Spooky Tour Photos channel, or maybe it was something I read. I can't remember where this was, but someone was at some location. I'm telling the story really bad. Or some haunted location we may or may not be associated with. They found a little black button in their hand. It just showed up I think it was during the tour. Um,
That's creepy.
the guy didn't have anything with black buttons on him, nothing. It just showed up in the palm of his hand. And I think he gave it to the guide because he didn't want to take it home.
I don't know. Okay, that's a debate when it comes to that, because on one hand, you want that thing as far away from you as possible. A ghost just gave you something. You don't want to take any negative energy that might be attached to it.
Mhm.
But at the same time, a ghost just gave it to you.
Like, what
Do
if
you really want to snub the ghost that was being nice and risk them coming and haunting you anyways?
I mean, like, what would you do if you suddenly found something in your hand? Like, you're intently listening. That's what it sounded like. He was listening to the guy tell the story, and all of a sudden, he just found this little black button in his hand.
My ADHD self would have been like, oh, I already had the button to begin with, and I would have just been rubbing the button once I found it.
Surely this was in my pocket as a fidget for later.
Yeah, exactly. I probably wouldn't have even realized that, oh, hey, there's a button in my hand now.
Yes. Yeah. I remember reading that and I was like, oh, that's so weird.
And then there's the theory, I don't know what's real and what's not, but there fae and stuff like that. There's always the theory that, hey, a fae gifted it to you, and now you've got this thing that if you actually accept it, you're in trouble, because that means you just made a deal with the fae, and now they're going to collect on
Right.
you at some
Yeah.
point. If
Yeah.
you believe in that thing, it's
Forever like, in debt.
forever in debt to a
Mhm.
being of power that you have no way of knowing what they're going to collect with.
Mhm.
That's a
Yes.
terrifying concept.
Hey,
So if that's what it was, it's a good thing he passed it on.
I know. Does your belief in paranormal stay within the ghost range, or does it expand to other things as well?
As I said, I don't really know what is real and what is not, but I'm a fantasy lover.
Mhm.
I am one of those people who firmly believe that all legends have a grain of truth.
Mhm. Mhm.
If every culture in the world has a legend about a dragon, at some point in time, dragons were real.
Right.
That's just what makes sense to
Mhm.
me. Um, so I guess to an extent, yeah, I'd say I believe in the mythical beings. I used to have a bumper sticker on my car that said, I break randomly for something to the effect of fairies, dragons, unicorns, and other mythical beings that only I can see. I mean, if that tells you everything you need to know about that question, we're golden.
Yeah, I always think if it's drawn across all these different cultures and time periods and places in the world, there has to be truth to it. Like the sea monsters and all of that, like they're always drawn looking similar. And even if you go back to, I always reference, I think there was something in Back to the Future when they
Hmm.
had a comic book with aliens. Is that what it was?
I think so.
It looks, I mean, they all like, then I was like, wait a minute, that looks, I mean, my like 10-year-old self didn't really put it together, but I was like, that's weird that looks like the same book that we have now, like in our room. Like,
Yeah,
like there has to be truth to some of these drawings or some of the stories and things like that when they all have a similar look to them.
exactly. If they look relatively close, if they have a similar origin story, all of these things spread across continents that had no communication with each other in any way, shape, or form in the whatever BC, like 300 BC, whatever,
Mhm.
there's no way that there wasn't something truthful about it. I mean,
Right.
after all, Scotland's national animal is the unicorn.
Yeah, I used to joke, I'm like, it was just a bad translation. um, have you ever had someone on tour that has really challenged your belief in ghosts and has really made it difficult to, like, they just disregard or trying to disprove everything you say?
I actually haven't experienced that yet. I'm waiting for when it does happen because I know it's going to happen eventually. The
Yeah.
most I get is the person who stands in the back going, arms crossed, frowny face, like completely disinterested, only there because the person he's with is into it, and it's typically a man. In my
Yeah.
experience, it's typically a man
Mhm.
standing with that kind of expression while the girls are always like, oh my God, tell me more.
Mhm. Yeah. And then they'll
So,
leave you a 5-star review. Like, my wife had the best time ever on this tour.
yeah, absolutely. They're always the ones who give the best review because they're like, if my person is happy, then I'm happy, even if I don't give a crap about this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. For 90 minutes, you made my wife really happy.
Yeah.
What do your friends say when you tell them what you do?
Most of them are really excited for me about it. They're glad that I found something that I'm passionate about. And I would say that I am passionate about this. I have worked so many jobs throughout the years. I've been an elderly caregiver, I've been a receptionist, I've been a McDonald's order taker, I've worked warehousing, all of these different things. And nothing has brought me as much joy as working as a ghost tour guide.
Oh, I like
So,
that. That's awesome. That's really good. Oh, well, happy we can fit you in then and
oh, yeah.
fulfill your dreams and probably your nightmares.
I definitely had some weird dreams after working this job.
I bet. Um, where do you see yourself taking this? Do you see yourself getting more and more into it and developing your tour style more?
I've actually been debating about starting a podcast of my own, and I might just use this interview as a piggyback to start my stuff, where I talk about some of the places that I talk about on my tour, but also go into other places around the world that have an interesting thing attached to it, and maybe do a YouTube channel attached to the podcast where I go through these places and afterwards find a recipe that's related to that location and go, this is something that they made back then,
Yeah.
and just be like, uh, haunted cooking or something like that. I haven't quite figured it out yet, but that's
Need to have
I
some really obscure ingredient in there to make it truly authentic. Like, I'm
yeah,
thinking
exactly.
Salem, like Salem has to have some pretty crazy old recipes that have been passed down from generation to generation. There's got to be some weird like forest berry
Oh,
or leaf in there.
weird forest berry or mushroom that you don't expect, that you have to collect this exact thing at this
Yeah.
season in order for it to be accurate. I'm sure there will be recipes like that, but there are one of the most popular things that they did in the 1800s with gravestones was women would put their recipes on the gravestone
For what purpose?
so
Like,
that it would get remembered.
oh,
One of the things that I was thinking about doing if I do that YouTube thing is look up gravestones that have recipes on them and find out the history of that person and talk about them in the podcast, and then in the YouTube video do, this is how to cook that recipe.
that's really cool. I did not know that. That's really a cool. I mean, I feel for those women that they probably were afraid of being forgotten. If
Well,
they're
back then, as I'm sure you already know, women in the 1800s weren't respected in any way, shape, or
yeah,
form. You were mothers starting at as young as 12 years old.
yeah,
You were either giving birth to your own kid or you were marrying someone who had near adult kids whose wife passed away.
yeah.
And instantly into motherhood and taking care of this family, and your entire life was dedicated to your husband and your kids and nothing else. So to have something remembered
Yeah.
beyond this is who I was as an adult, I can certainly understand why women would have strived for that.
Yeah, me too. That's really interesting. I've never considered that before. That would be something. I'm gonna leave my bread recipe on my headstone.
There's someone in I want to say it's Colorado, I could be wrong. There's someone in one of the old historic graveyards who has her chocolate chip cookie recipe
Yeah,
on the gravestone. Chocolate chip cookies. That's it.
that's really interesting. I'm gonna have to go down that rabbit hole on that one. That's an interesting. I never would have thought to put that on there. I'm gonna leave it on my urn. Be like one dash of what's inside.
One dash of my person's ashes.
Oh, that would be good. A couple of years,
Consume this in remembrance of me. Literally, the ashes.
clearly. A couple of years ago, we went to Arlington National Cemetery, and it was kind of a last minute. We call it a hurricane trip during one of the hurricanes we had. And at the time, we just were trying to find things that we could do on the fly, just kind of fill a few days before having to come back home after the hurricane. So we went to Arlington National Cemetery, and I wish we would have spent more time there, because on the way home from there, I caught a podcast about some child soldier that was buried there, and that the family still came and took care of his headstone. And so I wish I would have heard that like 3 days before, that we could have went and found it and just
Given flowers.
yeah. And then I'm sure there's so many stories like that. And I wish you could go through a cemetery and get some kind of personal bio on people. I just remember being
Yeah.
intrigued leaving there, because all of these people, not only were they soldiers, they're also husbands and fathers and friends and brothers and all of that. And to get their more of their story, even though it would take forever to read them all, I would have loved to have read about them, like what made them enlist, or where did they go, and who
What
did
things did they see?
Right.
Who did they interact with? What war did they what part of the war did they personally experience, you know?
Yeah, I always thought, I remember leaving there thinking, I hope we have another opportunity to come back to this, because I wanted to know more. And
Yeah.
then I was watching YouTube videos on the way home, and I was like, man, I really missed out on this one cemetery.
I understand completely. The same trip that I did Salem, we did this whole trip up from the capital all the way up to New York. We saw the Statue of Liberty in Ellis Island, and then we went up from there to Niagara Falls, and then we drove back down. You know, and one of the things we did while we were there was Arlington Cemetery, and oh my God, it was just surreal being there, seeing all of the graves and all of the huge monument statues and all of that. It definitely left, I
Yeah,
definitely left with that feeling myself, you know, of I wish I had more time here.
yeah, yeah. The only other time I felt that way was when I went to Paris. We went to the cemetery where Van Morrison was buried. Is that who?
Oh,
I mean, I still don't even know the full story or anything, but I wish I would have. That was before we had iPhones. I think it was
right.
before we had iPhones. And so that wasn't a thing to carry a phone around with like Wikipedia in your pocket. And I wish I could go back now again and look up every single like headstone I could have, or looked at it more, because it was just such a one of those hauntingly beautiful places. I'm sure the stories behind some of those sites were even more. I mean, it's just a beautiful cemetery. It's so old to begin with. And then like the famous people, I think there's a handful of famous people buried there. So it was one of those things I wish I could go back and do again. We were joking this morning that all of our favorite people are dead.
I actually agree with that completely. All of my favorite people are dead. If I could talk to anyone in the world, it would probably be like Shakespeare or something. And he
Yeah.
is centuries dead at this point, you
Yeah.
know.
Do you ever use any ghost hunting equipment or anything like that when you go out on tour, or have you ever thought about it?
I have done it in my own time.
Mm.
I have an audio recording from the Eastern State Penitentiary with what sounds like a lock clacking against metal and someone walking across the upper walk path.
Mhm.
When it was in one of the cell blocks that is completely boarded off. You can see through it, but you can't do go in. It's falling apart. It's dilapidated. There's rocks shorn from the ceiling all across everywhere. Um, and you can distinctly hear someone walking closer and clacking that metal lock against the metal as they walk by. It is absolutely creepy. It's a 2-minute audio file, and I can send it over to you after
Yeah.
this interview if you want to hear it. But I haven't done it on a tour yet, partially because I haven't figured out how to incorporate it into the tour without it running time over.
Mhm.
But it's definitely something I have attempted to do in my own free time.
Yeah. When you went to Salem, did you get a chance to check out the old Salem jail?
I didn't get to check out the old Salem jail, but I did get to go into the ruins.
Oh, okay.
There's the little gate, and they actually let you open the gate and walk down into the ruins and stand in the footwell of what would have been the basement of the house. And
Yeah.
there is this chill down your spine when you walk down those steps. I was just like, I am going to be here, and then I am getting the hell out of Dodge.
Yeah. The old Salem jail up until the early 1990s still used a chamber pot
Oh my
for
God.
that's why I'm just fascinated by it. I was like 1990. Like
They
that's
had running water by then.
oh for sure. Yes. I read that last fall and I was just fascinated. I'm not like a poop humor kind of person, but to me that was absolutely fascinating that they still use chamber pots 30 some years ago.
That's insane.
I know. I hope it's true because it's crazy.
Oh, I'm gonna be researching this after I get done because now I need to know if they
Yeah.
pooped in ponds.
So there's also last year we were working on some new tours for Salem. One of them is our pretty spooky tours, the Gallows of Salem, and they have tunnels between the walls of some really of the old buildings. And one of the spots, I'm probably going to do a really bad job telling this story too. One of the spots was a funeral home that used to make liquor during Prohibition.
Right.
And you could like get your loved one embalmed and prepared for a funeral and also pick up your bathtub gin. It was like a one-stop shop.
Oh my God. We have a spot on our tour that we on the Specters and Sinners tour that I talk about something very similar. It's the El Chingon Badass Mexican is the name of the location at this current point. It was at one point the Museum of Death. Back when it was originally built, it was in the basement, the city morgue.
Mm-hmm.
And in its ground floor, it was a furniture store.
Mm-hmm.
And my joke for it is um, they had a 2-for-1 deal. You could come on in and buy yourself a new kitchen set and get a coffin half price. You
What?
know, because they sold coffins because it was also the morgue, you know. And I found out something recently because we went to the Museum of Death, me and my fiance, and we talked to the owner or one of the guys who run it. I'm not entirely sure which he was. And he was like, "Oh, you run tours in San Diego. Have you been here?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. I talk about that place on my tour." And he told me something about the building that I didn't know before that wasn't in our tour information that I have since added to it because it's just such an interesting fact. Apparently, when they were renovating the building to turn it into the restaurant that it is now, after it was used as a museum of death, they found in the walls that there were still bodies from when it ran as a morgue.
Like that was their storage system?
There were still bodies buried in the walls from when it ran as a morgue.
All right.
I mean, it makes sense at this point to know that it is haunted, and not just by the man who killed
Right.
himself
Yeah.
inside. It makes sense that the building is haunted because so many people had their bodies left in a wall without any information on who they were.
Yeah.
That's gonna leave energy.
Yeah. Not the good kind of energy that you want.
No, not at all. Supposedly, people who work there say that there will be glasses thrown off of shelves
Yeah.
out of nowhere. They say that um, people will walk by and you'll feel like getting touched on your
Mhm.
shoulders. Um, Edward Tibbet, who was the man who committed suicide, can be seen inside pushing a broom because that's what he did as a job. And the way we describe his death on
Yeah.
the tour. We
Yeah.
full on in detail describe his death. He got tired of living one day because he was surrounded by death. He just couldn't handle it anymore. So he went down into the basement and he pulled out a pistol and stuck it in his mouth. And he shot it off, and there was suddenly a new art installation in town. His eyeballs were hanging out of his socket. There was blood and brain matter and skull bones splattered across the wall in this big thing. And when Edward Pigeon came in and found him, he found this new art installation made out of human flesh and blood.
It was at the first Body Worlds exhibit.
Exactly.
'Cause that's another really fascinating. Have you ever been to that one?
I have actually. It was for a science field trip when I was in middle school, I
Yeah.
think.
It was weird. I believe I went in at the Milwaukee Art Museum or the Milwaukee Public Museum, maybe one of the two. I saw it for the first time when I was in college. And I was like, this is weird. I'm never eating chicken again because it just like chicken breast to me.
Yeah.
I always remembered it just being really strange. And then last year, I started hearing some stories about how it came to be and where the people came from. Because I always thought it was people who gave their bodies to science to be
That's
used.
what we were told when we did the field trip.
No,
No.
there's a lot of the bodies that are actually Chinese prisoners, apparently. And there's a story that one of them was some like factory owner, his wife, no, the husband, maybe it was having an affair with a news anchor and she was pregnant and she is the pregnant woman in that. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Then I went on a little bit of a rabbit hole on Reddit on Body World and it was so weird. And then maybe 6 months later, I ended up back in Chicago at the Museum of Science and Institute, and they have a couple exhibits that look like they came from the body worlds. And I looked at it and I was like, I can't even stay here anymore. I need to go to a different area because it was just really weird. It
I
just,
had absolutely no idea it was anything of that sort, because when we went for that field trip, they told us point blank, these were all donated by people who wanted their bodies tested on for science.
yeah. So it's a pretty large exhibit and there's many different installations of it around the world. Maybe it's just some of them came from the Chinese prisoners, but
Knowing what I talk about on my specters, because we go deep into the history of the horrible things that happened to the Chinese immigrant workers
mhm,
on that Specters and Sinners tour, because we walk the streets of Chinatown, of old historic Chinatown, and talk about the brothels and the bad things that happened and all of that. And knowing that history and having heard some of that history on the Tombstone tour I went on Friday, and how when they were freed from the railroads because they didn't need to do the job anymore, the railroads were completed, they were not given any jobs, and the only job that the frontier people would allow them to have was as laundry workers.
mhm.
Knowing those things, it unfortunately isn't hard to believe that a
Believe
good
the
portion of those bodies are because of that.
I think the man who started the exhibit was from like Denmark or some maybe like the Netherlands or something like that.
Mhm.
some kind of Nordic country. I believe that's where he came
Mhm.
from. I don't remember how he got into it or what made him kind of how he got the deal with the Chinese prisoners. I have no idea. It just feels like a really big deep dive. And
Yeah.
like whenever I go on it, I'm like, I can't eat chicken. Like it just all looks like chicken to me and it's gross. That's always been a weird because I went with my friend who's a nurse and I'm not into the medical field at all. And she was fascinated by it because she was in nursing school. And the whole time I was like, wow, this is weird. This is really, and then seeing it a couple times more since then, I'm like, this is still really weird.
Yeah.
So it's always kind of been like a weird story that I'm like weirdly fascinated with. I think because I can't quite grasp what's going on with it.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
This is where my mind goes when things go weird. Just things that have really weird stories that you wouldn't think that that's how they came to be. And that's a lot
Yeah.
of things on tour end up being that kind of things
Oh,
like
yeah, absolutely.
where you get some house that some happy family lived there and then all of a sudden it's worse than an episode of Snapped. And then we get to talk about it every day on tour.
Exactly. And Whaley House is my go-to example of that to bring it up yet again. One of the reasons people believe it's so haunted is because of a family curse.
Mm-hmm.
They lost their first two children within 6 months of moving into that house. They ended up moving up to San Francisco and living there for 10 years. And then they had to come back because the big earthquake of 1904 happened up in San Francisco and destroyed everything. They moved back in. They rent out one of the rooms as a theater to a guy named Thomas Tanner, and Thomas Tanner suddenly shows up dead 17 days after opening.
Mm-hmm.
17 days after opening. You know, every single person in the Whaley family experienced a tragedy. Violet, the youngest daughter, ended up having a stillbirth and a year later committed suicide. And that the family moved out after that. Thomas Whaley passed away in the apartment they moved into, and the Francis, the only boy that they had that survived, and his mom, Anne, moved back. And 6 months after moving back into the house, Anne passed away. And then Frances passed away within 6 months to a year after her. And it's not just the Whaleys who lived in that house. Their cousins in Georgia were murdered brutally. Their cousins in New York were killed by a serial killer. And their cousins in Chicago were killed in the Great Chicago Fire. The entire family supposedly had a curse on it.
Yeah. You wonder where it started from. Like who
As far as I know, the research that I have done, and this is not conclusive by any means at all, the research I have done says that there wasn't really anything that happened to the Whaleys before they moved here from Europe, which means something happened either with their deal to move here,
Mhm.
or they disturbed something that they shouldn't have when they got here, and it just passed down the generations. Because the Whaley family that was killed in Georgia was Thomas Whaley's direct aunt and her kids. So Thomas Whaley's mother's sister and her three sons. The three boys were 14, 16, and 18 years old, and they were off at work or a bar or something like that.
Mhm.
I don't remember exactly which. And they came home to find their mother murdered in their living room, and heard the kitchen door slam shut, and ran out the kitchen door to chase down the guy and caught him about a mile away. The oldest two were killed in the fight, and the youngest, the 14-year-old, managed to kill him right as the police arrived. The police got there and took him away for killing the guy who killed his family. And
Um,
he was hung in jail by his cellmate 2 years later.
what country did they come from?
I think England.
Oh, I was wondering if maybe they went over the Bermuda Triangle and then got some weird magnetic force that
I
met.
mean, there's always a chance. I know they were English
Yeah.
citizens. The Whaleys came from England originally, but it's always possible they took the roundabout way.
something? Did they go over some force field or dead zone?
Disturb an indigenous spirit that they shouldn't have messed with, which is very possible the way the British came through and just knocked over everything and plowed through and killed.
Yeah. Yeah, it always makes you wonder. My husband is a big believer in there's like energies that are on the land more.
Yes.
Maybe has nothing to do with the house you live in or wherever you are. It's what happened on the land before we took over. That's
Yeah.
he's like, well, do you think that happens like that? And I'm like, I don't know. Kind of go
I
to,
firmly believe that there is lands that are sacred, and whether it's because of so many years of the indigenous peoples doing religious practices or family bonding time on those properties or burial grounds even. I don't know, but I do know that there are sacred spots that
yeah.
you have to be careful with. And if you're not, there's going to be repercussions.
Mhm. Here's a
Maybe the Whaleys messed with it.
Yeah. Here's a funny story from when I was a kid. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and there's tribes, like Native American Indian tribes there. And there's a lot that are no longer existent and all of that. So when I was a kid, we grew up learning about the Indian burial grounds. Okay. I
Yeah.
thought they were called Indian burial mounds.
Oh,
And so, and so, I mean, I was probably like 6 or 7 at the time. And we have these things in Wisconsin, you have above ground septic tanks, and it's just like a little hill in your backyard. And not everybody has them, but some homes do. We had ours underground, and some of our neighbors had them above ground, or my friends had them above ground. So we would play, and they would say, oh, the mound is ghoul, like if we're playing tag, it's like the safety zone. And I would be like, no, you can't go on there. That's sacred Indian mounds. I mean, I had no idea like this was separate things. I thought they were the same things. And
yeah. Well, I
probably
mean, to a kid who hears a snippet of information and your imagination just runs off with it, it makes sense.
and I'm
I can see where the jump came from.
I know I'm trying to be respectful of, what was there before. Because we just grew up believing and knowing and respecting that there's Indians were on this ground that we lived on. I lived
Yeah.
near Fox River. It just all made sense to me. All of that just made complete sense. All of the cities are Indian names, all of the mascots are Indians. It all just made sense. And so I thought they were Indian burial mounds. And I have come so far, but still not very far from that point.
Well, I mean, to an extent, I mean, it's possible they were at one point burial mounds instead of
Right.
just, in the ground. Because when Vikings did field burials instead of
Mhm,
water burials, they would build a ship, put it
mhm,
in the ground, put the body in it. They'd put in whatever treasures they had with them. Sometimes it would include their horse, and
mhm.
then they would cover it in rocks and dirt and then moss on top of it and make actual mounds in the dirt. So I mean, I don't know anything about how the indigenous buried their peoples, and I'm not going to attempt to make a guess because that would be very disrespectful
Right,
to those peoples. But I mean, it's always possible that they did something similar.
right. Yeah, yeah. And I still find Native Americans and all of their stories and their just the things that I think um, have been forgotten over recent time because
Yeah,
I'm afraid to talk about it. I find that so fascinating and I always want to learn more. Like I went out to South Dakota last year and seeing the Crazy Horse Monument. Like
yes.
this thing is like this is crazier than Crazy Horse. Like this thing is like incredibly huge and not done for a long time still. And I was just fascinated by it. And I think there's so much more that we can learn from their traditions and their beliefs
Yes.
and all of that. And I think that people are really afraid to talk about it. But I think so much of it aligns to where people get afraid to talk about it because they don't want to upset the spirits and they don't want to kind of stir things up with that.
But at the same time, I'm a firm believer in the belief that if you don't talk about these things, the culture, the history, the beautiful, and
Mhm.
also remember it with the bad, we're going to be doomed to repeat some of these horrible things that were committed. And honestly, the indigenous peoples are still dealing with a lot of major issues
Mhm.
to this day, that it's disrespectful of us to not talk about it.
100%. Yeah, if you stop talking about it, it becomes forgotten. Absolutely. And that's definitely something I don't want to erase from history or anything, but I think there's probably better ways to talk about it. And
Yes.
I mean, growing up, like we just lived in Wisconsin. There was so much of the Native American history in there and all of that. And I just remember though, like always being a little superstitious around.
Yes. Yeah, I will always be superstitious around things like that. If I believe in anything at all beyond ghosts, it's going to be in, the y- y- things like the Wendigo and the skinwalkers, and stuff like that from the indigenous cultures, because if they believed in it, there was a reason.
Right. There has to be truth to it. It's the same thing with the ghosts and that in the not only ghosts, but it's like the cryptid things. There has to be truth to it. Yeah.
Yeah, if I believe in anything at all, it's going to be in the cryptids and stuff like that, because they believed in it to such an extent that there is this whole thing about, uh, if you take off your shoes, if you take off your shoes outside and you leave them out overnight, you have to have them against the wall.
Right.
Don't whistle at night. Don't, if someone comes up to your door at night and calls your name, don't answer it. All of these different things. There's something about it that resonates in me that just sends shivers up my spine when I think about it happening, that I'm just like, I don't want to mess with this stuff, because they knew what they were talking about.
Yeah. Some of those crazy things like the whistling at night, those are ordinances in some cities still that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
and yeah, I'm always like, why is this? And then it's because people I think are too superstitious to lift whatever it is. It's almost like
yeah,
a superstition, which then plays into, I think a lot of people who follow Christianity tend to be very superstitious, especially Catholics and all of that. And where you have to, every time you enter a church right away or a room or or say someone's name, you're doing the sign of the cross.
yeah,
Like, oh yeah, that's a little like you think we're superstitious.
yeah,
Like we're all in this together.
yeah, exactly. I think everyone's a little bit superstitious in their own way, whether they're gonna, admit it publicly or not. That we all have our little habits that we do. I
Yeah.
knock on wood. I will knock 3 times on my head when someone says something that is potentially risky, like hope your tire doesn't blow out
Yeah. Right.
on your road trip, knock on wood.
Yeah.
With your skull being wood. And I know that one comes from Nordic culture of believing that there is fae in the trees who are watching you when you knock on the woods for something like blessing or permission or something from the tree spirits to be
Right.
there.
It has to be like 3 times and right away, and you're like panicking to try to find something to knock
Yeah,
on.
exactly. And if you can't find wood, you knock on your head.
Yeah. Do you do anything before tours to get yourself ready? Like any kind of set routines you have, or do you just like show up and start firing away?
I have a full costume that I get into. It's a little bit steampunk, a little bit Victorian. I've got this gorgeous velvety capelet that I found at an antique store that I recently added to it, that was probably more expensive than I should have spent the money on, but it completes the look, and I'll get on that I'll put on rosewater perfume, and I wear that specifically because Anne Whaley wore rosewater perfume, and she supposedly made it herself. So I like to add that little piece to make it more immersive for people, because people will go, "Oh, do you smell that perfume? Do you smell the roses?" And I'll be like, "I don't know what you're talking about," until we get to the Whaley House, and I'll boom, by the way, if you're smelling roses, it's me.
Mm-hmm.
Just to involve them a little bit more, because I'll respond to them with maybe Anne Whaley is following us around on our tour wanting to be talked about, or something like that. But I digress. To get back to your question, I'll get in costume, I'll put on my perfume, and I'll show up, and I will stand there either reading or going over my notes or whatever, and just wait for someone to show up, and I'm already in character, because putting on my costume is putting me into character. My family has been in acting and stuff like that for a really long time. Not, in Hollywood type
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but I did church plays when I was a little kid. I did um bigger stuff when I was in elementary and middle school, and then I did high school and college productions as well. And my parents both did acting in high school and college as well. So, being able to step into a character is at this point just second nature to me, when I've gotten that used to who the character is. And I use this whole persona for my character as well. I go by Wilhelmina Harker from Dracula, the
Okay.
book,
Yep.
and I'll make this joke at the end of if you guys enjoyed the tour and want to come again, please leave a 5-star review. It looks really good on me with the company, either through TripAdvisor or through company email. Again, my name is Mina. If you hated the tour and would never come again, my name is Vlad Jakul. It's just this little funny thing that I do, just a final joke for
Yep.
everyone.
We have guides that do that, and sometimes they'll throw someone that they don't really care for under the bus, and they'll say, like, if you had fun, my name is Stephanie. If you had a terrible time, my name is Karen.
Yes. Yeah, I also added this thing to the end of the tour, because we're allowed to take tips and stuff
Yep.
like that, and I feel it is horribly rude to just say, "Hey, give me your money."
Mhm.
So I took a line from Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream, one of the lines that Puck says near the end, and I did a couple of lines from that, and then I riffed my own verse for the end, and it goes if these, as Shakespeare's Puck said in A Midsummer Night's Dream, if these shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that we have but slumbered here, whilst these visions did appear. And then the part that I did. And
Mhm.
so my ghosts, they do advise, none who stand here hath need to hide, except for those who don't tip their guide. You
Right.
know, and
Yeah.
people get a laugh out of that one too, So I like to throw in these cheesy little jokes that make people go, "Oh, hey, this person isn't too serious. I can talk to them. I can engage with them, draw them in a little bit and break tension," because people will come on this tour and be like, "I don't know what to expect. I'm a little bit freaked out." Kids get really freaked out leading up to the tours, especially the little ones.
Mhm.
And you just have to know how to talk to them. You get into character, you tell a joke or two, and if the kid is still scared, you get down on their level and you talk to them about, what personally do you believe in?
Mhm.
What can you handle? What scares you?
Mhm.
And then reassure them that all of the ghosts on this tour are friendly and like to make jokes.
Mhm.
And then you just riff it so that the ghost stories aren't as scary when you get a child like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I took my kids on tour last summer, and I think my older ones were definitely intrigued. My younger ones, I think, were a little weirded out by people being buried in places that were not cemeteries.
Yes.
Like, there's just bodies buried in the middle of a city, and they're like, why?
Well, that's typically because at one point there was a cemetery and they just
Yeah.
paved it over.
Or they're in the walls of the Capitol in Nashville. They're like buried.
That too.
And they're like, why? And so I'm like, oh, well, this is a way to honor them. And they're like, that's weird, Mom. I'm like,
Yeah.
what I do.
The little old adobe chapel in Old Town San Diego has Don Jose Antonio Aguirre's body buried inside because that's where he wanted to be buried. I love that name. And I talk about that on the tour. I love that name, Don Jose Antonio Aguirre. It is very strong, very manly. If I
Yeah.
were a dude, I would want a name like that.
Yes. Well, Megan, it was so fun talking to you today. Thank you for telling us all about San Diego and
Yeah, of course.
the things that we might not know on tour with you. It was really fun having you, though. And we were talking before this that we feel like we know who you are from seeing your name pop up all the time, but it's always really nice to get to know the guides in person like this, because we so often just see names and then kind of forget there's actually people behind those names when we just see it pop up on our screen. So thanks for sitting down with us.
I really enjoyed myself. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Hometown Hauntings. Make sure you check us out across all social media channels, and we will see you next time.
Hometown Hauntings is brought to you by Ghost City Tours, the largest ghost tour company in the nation. With tours in over 20 cities, including New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, and beyond, we bring haunted history to life with spine-tingling tales and expert storytelling. Ready to experience the paranormal up close? Book now at ghostcitytours.com to explore a haunted city near you.